She gave him everything, her heart, her trust, and a second chance. He gave her silence and divorce papers. But 5 years later, she returns, not with revenge, but with something that makes his world stop. Triplets, that look exactly like him. Now, under the same roof that once broke them, will love be rebuilt? Or will buried secrets destroy them again? Now relax, sit back, and let your heart lead the way, because today's story will touch your soul in ways you never expected. Logan Carter stood alone in the windswept field where golden wheat once danced, now stripped bare like the heart in his chest. The farmhouse behind him groaned with age and regret, its paint peeled, its windows clouded with time, and the memories that once breathed life into its walls had turned to ghosts. The bitter chill in the air didn't bother him. The coldest thing he knew now lived inside his ribs, where warmth used to bloom whenever she smiled. He ran a calloused hand through his black tousled hair, gazing across the empty horizon, haunted by the echo of laughter that used to fill these acres. "She left," he muttered, voice cracking like dry earth. "Just vanished. Took my heart with her, and left behind silence." Those words had become his mantra, his curse and his confession. 9 years had passed, but it felt like yesterday and eternity all at once. The barn where they kissed on a hay bale was locked shut, like his chest ever since. He remembered the way her sundress spun in the wind, how she danced barefoot near the old oak tree. Now that tree stood like a lonely witness to a love that had withered before its time. Logan's boots sank into the mud, the weight of his guilt pulling him deeper with each step. He'd begged her to stay the night before she left. She'd said nothing, just tears, trembling lips, and then she was gone. That was all he had to hold on to. A quiet exit and 1,000 unanswered questions. The townspeople whispered. "She found someone richer," they said. "Ran off with a big city guy." Logan never answered them. He never denied it either. What was there to say when you didn't know the truth yourself? He remembered coming home that rainy night to an empty house, the fire still warm, her shoes gone. He had waited. An hour, then 2. By dawn, he realized she wasn't coming back. No note, no goodbye, just empty drawers and hollow echoes. In a flashback that clawed at his mind daily, he saw her running through the downpour, clutching a letter to her chest like it held her last breath. Her face was streaked with rain and despair. She had tried to tell him something important, but he never saw that letter, never read her words, and so the story was written by silence. Logan believed she had chosen money over memories, that the girl who once kissed the dirt on his hands and told him it smelled like life had traded all that for champagne and clean fingernails. It made him bitter. It made him hard. But it also made him wrong. The farm, once full of sunflowers she'd planted herself, had become a wasteland of weeds. Without her, everything lost its rhythm. Harvests came late, debts piled up, and Logan stopped singing in the mornings. He lost half the land to the bank last winter. Couldn't even blame them. He had no fight left. All the dreams they'd shared, the bed and breakfast idea, the organic produce stand, the barn weddings, died the day she left. He had built this life for her, with her, and without her it was like trying to breathe underwater. There were nights he'd wake up and hear her voice in the wind. He wasn't sure if it was memory or madness. Sometimes he'd still cook 2 plates of dinner out of habit, only to scrape one into the trash, stomach too tight to eat. Her toothbrush still sat in the drawer. Her perfume still lingered faintly on the old flannel shirt he kept in the closet. He'd tell himself it was just fabric, just scent, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. It was the last piece of her he had. He blamed her, but he missed her. He cursed her, but he loved her still. That contradiction became the soil he walked on, bitter, cracked, and aching for something to grow. The townspeople moved on. Logan didn't. He stayed, waiting without admitting it, surviving but not living. They say time heals all wounds, but time only buried them deeper. He didn't know she had written him, twice. He didn't know Evelyn, his mother, had intercepted those letters with cruel precision and burned them before he could see them. He didn't know Amara had been pregnant. He didn't know she had begged Evelyn for a second chance, only to be cast away like a stray. Logan wasn't cruel, just misled. He didn't know the truth, and that ignorance built a prison of pain. In moments like now, staring at the empty rows where they once laid under stars, he wondered if she had ever truly loved him. Maybe I was just her phase, he whispered into the wind, her escape before she found something real. But a voice deep inside him, quieter than regret but louder than pride, said no. She had loved him. He saw it in the way she looked at him like the sun rose just to kiss his face. He felt it in the way she touched his scars, not flinching but tracing them like maps of where he'd survived. That wasn't a lie. That wasn't pretend. He just didn't know why she vanished. Not yet. He picked up a rusted horseshoe from the ground, running his thumb along its curve. "We were lucky once," he murmured, then tossed it into the field like it could carry his memories away. But nothing ever did. Not the whiskey, not the work, not the years. Ghosts didn't leave just because you wanted them to. They lingered. They clung. And hers? Her ghost walked beside him every day, in the creak of the barn door, in the kitchen floorboard that still squeaked under her favorite spot, in the smell of cinnamon that sometimes drifted in for no reason. He wondered what he'd say if he ever saw her again. Would he shout, cry, fall to his knees, or just stare, broken and silent, like the man he'd become? The farm didn't just lose crops when she left, it lost its soul. And so did he. The sky began to darken, clouds rolling in like they carried the weight of his memories. Logan didn't move. He welcomed the storm. Rain had taken her. Maybe rain could bring her back. A foolish hope. But hope was all he had left. The storm had just started to murmur when Amara stood beneath the porch light of the Carter farmhouse, her hands trembling as she clutched the letter to her chest. One last message that held every shattered piece of her heart, every truth she needed him to know before she left for good. The ink on the page was still fresh, smudged slightly where a tear had fallen, her handwriting shaky but honest. She had rewritten that letter 3 times that day, each version less guarded than the one before, until she couldn't hide anything anymore. She told him about the baby. She told him she never stopped loving him. She told him she was scared, not because of him, but because of the world that looked at their love like it was wrong. And she told him she was still willing to fight. If he read those words and called her back, that was all she needed. One voice, one reason to stay. But instead of Logan opening the door, it was Evelyn who emerged like a ghost in silk. Her eyes, cold and calculating, landed on Amara like she was dirt on the porch wood. She didn't speak at first. She just stared, lips curled as if the mere sight of Amara breathing on her family's land was an offense. Then her eyes drifted to the letter. Her fingers moved like claws, swift and purposeful, snatching the envelope from Amara's hand before she could speak. "Please," Amara begged, breathless, "just let him read it. That's all I ask." Evelyn didn't answer with words, only turned on her heel and vanished into the house. Amara stood there, frozen, drenched in rain and fear, her heart pounding like it was trying to chase after the letter itself. Inside, Evelyn walked to the living room fireplace without hesitation. The flames licked the air like they were already hungry for secrets. She didn't open the envelope. She didn't even glance at it. She simply held it out over the fire and whispered, "You don't belong here. My son D2 serves better." The letter curled and twisted in the flames, darkening at the edges before turning to ash, the truth consumed without ever being heard. Amara's knees buckled outside as if she'd been stabbed. "He deserves love," she sobbed, pressing her hand to the glass. Evelyn stood behind the curtains, watching without pity. There was no satisfaction in her face, only quiet cruelty, the kind that wears pearls and drinks tea while ruining lives. Amara turned away moments later, her world unraveling as the storm grew louder. She walked down the gravel road with no umbrella, no car, no plan, only a child in her womb and a heartbreak she hadn't earned. She whispered his name into the wind as if it might reach him anyway, but the wind gave nothing back. That night, Amara slept on a bench at the edge of town, one hand protectively over her stomach, the other clutching her torn coat. She hadn't meant to leave like this. She had wanted to stay and fight, but you can't fight when the battlefield burns your only weapon before you draw it. By morning, she was gone from Carter County, and Logan, still asleep upstairs, woke to a silence that would haunt him for years. He asked Evelyn if anyone had come by. She said no, lied without blinking. He checked the porch. Nothing. The rain had washed away every footprint, every sign. The letter was gone. The woman was gone. And the baby, a secret now growing inside a mother who had been forced to walk alone. Evelyn carried that lie like a stone in her chest, but she never let it show. Not even when Logan drank himself to sleep for weeks. Not even when he stared at the door like it might open at any moment. Amara, meanwhile, moved to the city, where no one knew her name or her heartbreak. She got a job at a diner and lived in a one-room apartment that smelled like old wood and new beginnings. She never stopped talking to the baby growing inside her. "He would have loved you," she'd whisper each night. "He still might. One day." The twins were born with Logan's eyes, blue like winter skies, deep like sorrow. She named the boy Lucas, after his father, and the girl Hope, because that's all she had left. Every time she held them, she imagined Logan's arms around them, imagined him reading the letter she wrote and showing up at her door. But he never came because he never knew. She wrote him again a year later. Different address, different envelope. But the letters never made it. Whether it was fate or Evelyn, she couldn't say. Eventually she stopped trying, not because she stopped loving him, but because love had turned into survival. She poured her soul into her children, raised them with stories about the farm, about a man who once loved her like the sun loved the earth. She kept his picture in a box, next to a tiny pair of baby shoes she had planned to send him once, until she realized no one was listening. Logan, on the other hand, buried himself in work and routine, never knowing that 2 pieces of his heart were out there growing up without him. He convinced himself that Amara left for someone richer, better, safer. He told himself the lie so many times, it became truth. But deep down, on lonely nights, he still wondered, what if she tried to come back? What if I just didn't see it? The ghosts of that night haunted them both in different ways. For Amara, it was the sound of burning paper and the coldness in Evelyn's eyes. For Logan, it was the silence of a porch that never received a letter. And for Evelyn, it was the face of a woman she thought she'd erased, now returning in the eyes of children she didn't know existed, because fate always circles back. Secrets never stay buried, and letters, especially the ones never read, have a way of rewriting stories when you least expect it. 9 years had passed like a storm without rain, loud, relentless, and dry in mercy. Logan dragged himself through each morning with the weight of invisible chains, the sun rising not with hope, but with haunting memories there that stung like salt on open wounds. The farm, once blooming with life, now stood tired and hollow, like him, its fences warped, its fields thin, its heart gone. His hands, once strong with purpose, had grown calloused from trying to hold on to something that kept slipping. Land, hope, love. He'd talk to the wind sometimes, as if she could hear, as if the wind still remembered her name. "Amara," he'd whisper into the empty dawn, choking on the sound of it. Her laughter used to echo through the barn, but now only the brittle creak of dying wood answered back. Each day he fed the animals in silence, ploughed the field in silence, sat alone at the dinner table in silence. Silence had become his new companion, unwanted, unyielding. The bank had long stopped being patient, and the red notices piled on his desk like angry accusations. He'd sold his truck, then his tools, and eventually the small pond he and Amara once fished at, just to buy more time. But you can't buy time. You can only lose it. And he'd lost 9 years to grief and misunderstanding. Every time he'd pass by the guest room, he'd pause, his throat tightening at the thought of the little nursery they once dreamed of painting yellow. He remembered how she smiled at baby clothes in town, how she held her stomach once, laughing nervously and whispering, "Someday." But someday never came. All he had now were questions that clawed at his insides. Why did she leave without a goodbye? Why didn't she take the things she loved? Her worn-out journal still lay untouched under the mattress, but he couldn't bring himself to read it, afraid it might hold more pain than answers. He hated her for vanishing. He loved her for existing. He hated himself more. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch at night and drink himself numb, just to stop wondering if she was safe or if she thought of him too. His mother, Evelyn, still visited, but even her presence had grown cold. "You're wasting your life on a ghost," she'd snap. But he'd ignore her, because only ghosts understand the haunted. He worked until his body ached and his spirit sagged, and still the nights were the worst. That's when the memories became cruel, showing him flashes of her skin glowing under the moonlight, her voice humming in the kitchen, her fingers wrapped around his. It wasn't just Amara he missed. It was who he was with her. The man with dreams, with light in his chest. Now he barely recognized the shadow in the mirror. His beard was overgrown, his smile extinct. The letters he wrote, hundreds of them, were tucked away in a drawer, unsent, unread. Letters filled with apologies, regrets, and prayers. Each year on her birthday, he left wildflowers at the old train station where she vanished. And each year, the wind carried them away before anyone ever noticed. His friends had all moved on, started families, chased futures. Logan just stood still, not out of choice, but because the moment she left, time stopped meaning anything. A neighbor once offered to buy half the farm, and Logan almost said yes, but then remembered her barefoot dances through the wheat, and he just couldn't. He couldn't give away the last place she touched. Sometimes he'd see a woman in town with braided hair and dark eyes, and his heart would race, only to break again when she turned around. Every face reminded him that hers was gone. Every laugh reminded him that hers no longer echoed in his world. But still, he waited. Not because he believed she'd return, but because part of him never left that morning she did. Part of him was still standing on that porch, watching rain hit the road, hoping she'd come running back with an explanation and a hug that healed. He didn't know she left with a life growing inside her. He didn't know he'd become a father that night she sobbed into the storm. He didn't know that somewhere there was a little heartbeat carrying his blood and her smile. All he knew was that the sunrise made him ache and the sunset made him cry. And in between, he survived, one breath at a time, haunted by the letter he never received and the goodbye that was never truly spoken. Logan stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror. The flickering had grown calloused from trying to hold on to something that kept slipping. Land, hope, love. He'd talk to the wind sometimes, as if she could hear, as if the wind still remembered her name. Amara, he'd whisper into the empty dawn, choking on the sound of it. Her laughter used to echo through the barn, but now only the brittle creak of dying wood answered back. Each day he fed the animals in silence, ploughed the field in silence, sat alone at the dinner table in silence. Silence had become his new companion, unwanted, unyielding. The bank had long stopped being patient, and the red notices piled on his desk like angry accusations. He'd sold his truck, then his tools, and eventually the small pond he and Amara once fished at, just to buy more time. But you can't buy time. You can only lose it. And he'd lost 9 years to grief and misunderstanding. Every time he'd pass by the guest room, he'd pause, his throat tightening at the thought of the little nursery they once dreamed of painting yellow. He remembered how she smiled at baby clothes in town, how she held her stomach once, laughing nervously and whispering, "Someday." But someday never came. All he had now were questions that clawed at his insides. Why did she leave without a goodbye? Why didn't she take the things she loved? Her worn-out journal still lay untouched under the mattress, but he couldn't bring himself to read it, afraid it might hold more pain than answers. He hated her for vanishing. He loved her for existing. He hated himself more. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch at night and drink himself numb, just to stop wondering if she was safe or if she thought of him too. His mother, Evelyn, still visited, but even her presence had grown cold. "You're wasting your life on a ghost," she'd snap. But he'd ignore her, because only ghosts understand the haunted. He worked until his body ached and his spirit sagged, and still the nights were the worst. That's when the memories became cruel, showing him flashes of her skin glowing under the moonlight, her voice humming in the kitchen, her fingers wrapped around his. It wasn't just Amara he missed. It was who he was with her. The man with dreams, with light in his chest. Now he barely recognized the shadow in the mirror. His beard was overgrown, his smile extinct. The letters he wrote, hundreds of them, were tucked away in a drawer, unsent, unread. Letters filled with apologies, regrets, and prayers. Each year on her birthday, he left wildflowers at the old train station where she vanished. And each year, the wind carried them away before anyone ever noticed. His friends had all moved on, started families, chased futures. Logan just stood still, not out of choice, but because the moment she left, time stopped meaning anything. A neighbor once offered to buy half the farm, and Logan almost said yes, but then remembered her barefoot dances through the wheat, and he just couldn't. He couldn't give away the last place she touched. Sometimes he'd see a woman in town with braided hair and dark eyes, and his heart would race, only to break again when she turned around. Every face reminded him that hers was gone. Every laugh reminded him that hers no longer echoed in his world. But still, he waited. Not because he believed she'd return, but because part of him never left that morning she did. Part of him was still standing on that porch, watching rain hit the road, hoping she'd come running back with an explanation and a hug that healed. He didn't know she left with a life growing inside her. He didn't know he'd become a father that night she sobbed into the storm. He didn't know that somewhere there was a little heartbeat carrying his blood and her smile. All he knew was that the sunrise made him ache and the sunset made him cry. And in between, he survived, one breath at a time, haunted by the letter he never received and the goodbye that was never truly spoken. Logan stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, the flickering light above him casting sharp shadows on his hollowed face. The man staring back, no longer the vibrant dreamer who once planned a life with Amara, but a ghost tethered to memories that refused to die. His once sparkling blue eyes, now dulled with sorrow, studied every weathered line etched by years of silent grief, guilt, and aching loneliness, and he blinked hard as if doing so could blur out the past. His hands trembled as he touched the stubble on his jaw, remembering how Amara used to smile and trace her fingers there on Sunday mornings, calling him her sunrise. But now the echo of her laughter had long faded, replaced by silence so thick it hurt to breathe. The faucet creaked when he turned it, rusty water dripping like the tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in years, not even the day the foreclosure notice came, or when the barn collapsed under snow, or when his own mother, Evelyn, passed without ever mentioning the name Amara again. The scent of the farmhouse, damp wood, fading hay, and dust, had become his constant companion, a reminder that everything once full of life had withered. And he often found himself walking into empty rooms, hoping she might somehow be there, seated by the window with her soft hum filling the air, pregnant with the life he never knew she carried. When Ben arrived that morning, unannounced and carrying a sack of groceries, Logan hadn't even looked up from the table until his childhood friend slammed his fists down and said with tears in his voice, "You stopped living the day she left." And those words struck harder than any storm Logan had weathered. He couldn't respond. His throat felt like gravel, his chest heavy with the weight of memories unanswered, and for the first time in years he wanted to scream at fate, at Evelyn, at himself. In that moment, Logan realized he wasn't just grieving Amara's departure, he was mourning the version of himself that had died the night she vanished. He stepped back from the mirror, then forward again, unable to tear his gaze from the wreckage of his own soul, and muttered, "Where did you go, Amara?" Like a man begging the universe for one more chance to rewrite a past that refused to stay buried. Dust floated through the air like old secrets, and his heart, though cracked, began to whisper questions he'd buried beneath work and whiskey. What if she hadn't left by choice? What if something had stopped her? What if everything he believed was a lie? The questions felt dangerous, like lighting matches in a dry forest. But Logan couldn't ignore them anymore. He walked past Ben without another word, grabbed his coat from the hook by the door, and headed to the one place he hadn't been in nearly a decade, Amara's old neighborhood on the other side of town. The drive was silent, but his thoughts roared. Images of Amara in the rain, clutching something close to her chest, flashed in his mind like lightning through darkness. When he arrived, the house she'd once lived in was abandoned, ivy climbing its walls like time itself trying to erase her. And yet Logan felt her there, in the cracks, in the breeze, in the ache of not knowing. He stood at the gate, unable to move forward, afraid that the truth might be worse than the silence he'd lived with. Then a voice echoed from the porch. An old neighbor, Ms. Ruthie, her cane tapping against the wood. "You still searching for her?" Logan turned slowly, startled, and nodded. The woman studied him with eyes that knew more than they said. "You should have come sooner," she whispered, before walking back inside, leaving Logan trembling in the middle of the street, realizing the past might not just haunt him, it might still be alive and waiting to be faced. And as the sun dipped behind the trees and his reflection darkened in a nearby window, Logan understood that the man in the mirror wasn't broken beyond repair, just waiting for the truth to set him free. The familiar groan of the old farm gate echoed like a ghost through the fading afternoon light, breaking the routine silence Logan had grown numb to. He wiped the grease from his hands, still hunched under the tractor's rusted hood, and turned toward the sound, confused at first. No one ever visited unannounced. But when he saw the sleek black SUV roll over the gravel path like it belonged nowhere near the dusty bones of his broken world, time seemed to slow. The door opened, and when her feet touched the ground, the air left his lungs like a punch. Amara. Her name didn't even form on his lips. His body remembered it before his mind could. She stood tall, not with the uncertainty of a woman returning for answers, but with the silent strength of someone who had built an entire life on top of heartbreak. But what made his knees almost buckle were the two small figures beside her, children, both clutching her hands, mirrors of his own eyes, the shape of his chin etched into their innocent faces. His heartbeat turned into a roaring chaos in his ears, and the earth beneath his boots shifted with a tidal force he hadn't braced for. Amara's gaze was steady, but he saw the battle behind it. Tears she wouldn't shed, words she'd rehearsed too many nights. "Logan," she said, her voice firm but cracked at the edges like old porcelain. "We need to talk." His lips trembled. The years without her rushed forward like a flood. The rain-soaked nights, the unanswered questions, the agony of her absence carved into every board of the farmhouse. He took one step forward, then another, until he stood just feet from the children. His children. The question didn't even need words. The truth was screaming in their faces. One had his stormy blue eyes, the other Amara's dimples and radiant skin. He looked at her, searching her expression for the lie that had stolen 9 years from him, but all he saw was pain, and strength, and love, and something unbreakable. "Why didn't—" "But you—" he started, but the words died in his throat, shredded by emotion too big to shape. Amara didn't flinch. "Because your mother burned the letter," she said flatly. "Because she said I didn't belong. And I believed her, until these two gave me the courage to come back." Logan staggered back like he'd been struck. His mother, Evelyn. Rage surged through him, burning hotter than grief ever had. His whole life, he'd mourned a love he thought had been sold for money, and all the while the truth had been buried in ashes by the very hands that raised him. His eyes watered, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of what had been lost. First love, then years, and now a connection with the only family he never knew he had. "These are my—" he whispered, voice cracking as he knelt to eye level with the children. They looked back at him with a mix of curiosity and instinctual recognition, and when one of them, his daughter, placed her small hand on his cheek, he broke. Hot, silent tears streamed down his weathered face, washing away years of blame, replacing them with awe, remorse, and something dangerously close to hope. Amara's lips parted, and for a second her pain softened. "Twins," she said quietly. 8 years old. They know who you are. I never lied about you." Logan looked up at her, his voice raw. "But I lived a lie every single day without you." He stood, the children now wrapped in his arms like lifelines, and he faced her, his Amara, not a memory, but real, flesh and soul and fire. The silence that followed was louder than thunder, as if the land itself held its breath. Everything had changed. Everything was just beginning. Logan's breath hitched as the boy's words struck like thunder in his chest, his knees giving way as he dropped to the dirt path before them, arms limp at his sides, eyes wide, shimmering with tears that had waited nearly a decade to fall. The world blurred around him, but the boy's face, his face, remained piercingly clear, a mirror of his own youth etched into smaller, softer features, with curious blue eyes and a jawline not yet hardened by the cruelty of time. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. Only a gasp, a whisper, a silent scream swallowed by guilt and awe. The girl, standing beside her brother, clutched her mother's hand and tilted her head, puzzled by the broken man before them, while Amara stood frozen, her heart torn between anger and sorrow, watching the man who once held her soul unravel in front of their children. Logan lifted his shaking hands, reaching forward but halting mid-air, afraid to touch what might vanish, afraid he didn't deserve it. You're really my—" he choked, unable to finish as his voice cracked under the weight of 1,000 yesterdays. The boy nodded slowly, not fully understanding the gravity of what he had just awakened, but drawn to the man who seemed both a stranger and somehow familiar in the quiet ache of their blood. Logan sobbed into his palms, the sound raw and aching, echoing across the silence of the farm like a ghost begging for forgiveness. Amara blinked back tears, but one slipped down her cheek as she remembered the night she gave birth alone, whispering his name through pain, cursing the betrayal that never truly came from him, but from a mother who destroyed love before it could speak. Logan finally looked up, eyes red, lips trembling. "How old are they?" he asked, voice barely audible. 8, she replied, not needing to say more. He did the math. 8 years, 3 months, and a few days. His heart cracked wider as the timeline aligned with the last day she disappeared. Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. But his voice held no blame, only desperation, the kind that drips from a man who has lived half alive. Amara clenched her jaw, the fire of injustice burning through her veins. "I did," she said bitterly. "I tried, but someone decided I wasn't good enough to be heard." Her voice trembled with fury and heartbreak. And in that moment, Logan knew without asking. "My mother," he whispered. "She burned it?" Amara nodded once and his heart shattered again, but this time into jagged pieces that bled guilt. He wanted to scream, to claw back time, to fight fate itself, but all he could do was look at the children and feel the years he'd missed suffocating him. "I missed everything," he murmured. "First words, first steps, birthdays. I wasn't there." His voice quivered with helplessness. The boy took a cautious step forward and reached out, resting a small hand on Logan's shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly, and Logan wept harder, because it wasn't. Amara bent down beside them, brushing her daughter's curls behind her ear as she watched Logan crumble, both devastated and relieved, like a man finally finding the pieces of a puzzle he didn't know he lost. "You deserve to know them," she said, though the words scratched her throat. "But you have to earn it." Logan nodded, wiping his face. "I will," he swore. "Every day." The kids exchanged glances, uncertain but intrigued by the man with their eyes and pain in his voice. Logan stood slowly, shakily, like a man reborn, and looked at Amara with reverence and regret. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, "but I want to try." She didn't smile, but she didn't turn away. "Then start with being their father, not just biologically. Be present, be kind, be better." Her words were a test, but also a plea. He nodded again, more firmly this time, and looked down at his son, his own blood, and finally allowed himself to believe the boy looked like him, because he was him. A part of him had lived all these years without his knowledge, and now, with trembling hands and a heart full of sorrow and second chances, Logan reached for redemption, one breath at a time. Logan remained on his knees, his breathing shallow as the weight of Lothar. Years pressed hard on his chest, and Amara, with trembling hands and eyes shimmering with old wounds, reached into her bag and pulled out a weathered brown folder, the symbol of everything they'd both lost and what she dared to hope they could reclaim. She stepped closer, holding it out, not like a gift, but like a fragile truth long buried, her voice steady but soft. "I bought it back. For them, for you, for us. If that's still possible." The folder trembled slightly in her grasp as Logan slowly looked up, confusion and disbelief clashing in his tear-soaked eyes, his calloused fingers reaching with hesitation, as if afraid touching it would shatter the moment. As he opened the folder and saw the title deed with his father's name crossed out, and hers written in Amara Rhodes, his vision blurred again, this time not from regret, but awe. His fingers gripped the paper like a lifeline, and a sob broke from his lips, raw and cracked. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Amara's lips trembled, her breath catching painfully before she said it, something she had carried for nearly a decade, a truth rotting inside her like rust on iron. "I tried. Your mother made sure I didn't reach you." Her voice didn't shake in accusation, only in grief, and the silence that followed echoed with the weight of manipulated fate. Logan blinked, stunned, as if he'd been punched, the image of Evelyn's cold eyes flashing in his memory like a ghost finally named. He staggered to his feet, still holding the deed, then looked at Amara. Truly looked at her. Not just the woman he once loved, but the mother of his children, the warrior who had endured alone. The twins watched in quiet awe, unsure of what exactly was happening but sensing the shift in the air, their little hearts sinking to the beats of reunion and redemption. Logan took a step toward her, the paper pressed against his chest like armor and apology, and whispered, "She told me you left without a word. I waited by the mailbox for months." Amara choked on a breath she didn't know she was holding, tears slipping down her cheeks as she replied, "I wrote every week until I gave birth. But she burned my letters. Every one." Logan's eyes widened in horror, the world tilting under his feet as he realized how much of his pain had been carefully constructed by the one woman he trusted most after Amara. He turned away briefly, ashamed, fists clenching at the thought of his own blindness, of how he'd let silence win for too long. "She said you were never good enough," he muttered brokenly, to which Amara replied with a weary smile. "She said the same to me, but love doesn't need permission." The children looked between them, puzzled and tender, and the boy whispered, "So, can we stay?" Logan dropped to his knees again, this time pulling them into his arms, hugging them with the hunger of 9 years lost, the scent of their hair and the sound of their little breaths crashing into his soul like a flood. Amara watched, her heart cracking and mending at once, unsure whether to feel relieved or more broken than before, because forgiveness was a process, not a moment. Logan rose with the children still clinging to his arms and looked her straight in the eyes for the first time in years, not as a memory, but as a man seeing the mother of his children, the woman who never stopped trying. "Can we start again?" he asked, voice shaking. Amara looked down, biting her lip, unsure whether this was a fairy tale or the start of another storm, but she nodded anyway, because hope had survived worse. He looked at the farmhouse in the distance, weathered and aching just like them, and said, "Let's go home." As they walked, Logan reached out and took her hand in his, tentative but real, and Amara didn't pull away. The children ran ahead toward the porch, their laughter ringing like bells through the wind. Evelyn watched from an upstairs window, her face pale, mouth tight, as everything she tried to bury returned to bloom in spring. Sigden, Ashan, and Amara stood at the door, hesitating for a heartbeat, then stepped inside together, where everything began, and where, just maybe, something new could begin again. The farmhouse had fallen quiet, save for the soft creak of the old porch swing as Logan and Amara sat beneath a velvet sky dusted with stars, their silhouettes framed by moonlight and memories too heavy to ignore. The children were asleep inside, unaware that the air outside was thick with words that had waited years to be spoken, hearts that had broken in silence and now beat timidly beside one another. Logan held a mug of cold coffee, his fingers trembling not from the night chill, but from the storm rising inside him, of grief, longing, confusion, and a quiet hope he dared not name. Amara sat beside him, her braided hair falling over her shoulder, her eyes searching the heavens like she was looking for courage among the constellations. "I begged her to give you the letter," she whispered finally, her voice cracked but steady. "I even wrote twice." Logan turned his face slowly toward hers, as if afraid that even eye contact might break the delicate bridge slowly forming between them. "She said nothing," he said hoarsely. "Nothing. I thought you left because I wasn't enough." Amara swallowed hard. "I left because I had no choice. I was carrying your child, and your mother said if I ever showed up again, she'd destroy me. And I believed her." Her voice quivered, not with anger, but the exhaustion of holding back the truth for too long. Logan's jaw clenched, tears brimming in his eyes, and he looked out into the dark fields that once held their laughter. "I thought I was going crazy," he muttered. "Every field I plowed, every quiet night on this porch, I heard your voice. I talked to you like you were still here." A tear slid down Amara's cheek, and she reached for his hand, slowly, cautiously, as if unsure if her touch would still be welcome. When their fingers met, it was gentle, no fire, no passion, just the warmth of shared pain and forgotten closeness. "I watched you from a distance once," she confessed. "Years ago, you were repairing the fence near the west side. You looked so tired but still beautiful. I almost walked up to you, but then I remembered the last words your mother said to me. Logan exhaled sharply, the sound almost a sob, and shook his head. She ruined us. She ruined everything. Amara nodded silently, and for a moment neither spoke. They just listened to the chorus of crickets and the slow rhythm of their breathing sinking for the first time in nearly a decade. "But we're here now," she said quietly, barely above a whisper. Logan turned toward her, and their eyes met, blue and brown, storm and earth, years and lifetimes between them. "Why does it still feel like you never left?" he asked, and Amara's smile trembled, soft and sad. "Because my heart never did," she said. They sat in silence, their hands still entwined, the stars shimmering like distant promises above them. Logan traced her knuckles with his thumb and whispered, "There were nights I drank just to forget your laugh, and nights I drank just to hear it." She leaned her head on his shoulder, their bodies inching closer not with hunger, but with the deep ache of love that had never truly faded. "I used to hum to them," she said of the twins. "Your favorite songs, the ones you used to sing in the barn when you thought no one was listening." Logan let out a breathy laugh, and it cracked halfway into a sob. "You remember that?" She nodded. "I remember everything." The moonlight glinted off their joined hands, and Logan turned, pressing his lips gently against the back of hers, not a kiss of desire, but one of reverence, apology, and desperate love. "You raised them alone," he murmured. "You gave them everything, and I wasn't there." Amara lifted her head, tears glistening on her cheeks. "You didn't know, Logan. That wasn't your fault. You didn't leave us. You were left in the dark." He, too, took her face gently in his hands and stared at her like she was a miracle he'd been too blind to see. "You look even more beautiful now," he whispered, voice breaking. She smiled through tears. "So do you. You just don't see it yet." They didn't kiss. They didn't undress. They didn't need to. That night wasn't about bodies. It was about hearts. It was about two broken people beginning to stitch their wounds in silence and touch, in glances that said, "I missed you," and hands that said, "I never stopped loving you." Logan laid his head against hers, their foreheads touching gently, and for the first time in years, he felt warm. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, "but I want to try again. If there's still a chance." Amara closed her eyes. There's always a chance when love never died. And as they sat under that infinite sky, hearts pressed close but bodies untouched, tears falling like soft prayers, they both knew that this moment, was the start of everything they'd lost, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of everything they were about to find again. The silence of the night faded into a golden morning as the sun gently poured over the creaky farmhouse, warming its bones like an old friend returning after years away. Logan stood by the window, watching Amara as she stepped into the yard with a quiet determination that stirred something deep within him, something hopeful, something alive. The kids, Noah and Ava, dashed barefoot across the dew-kissed grass, their giggles echoing through the barn like music that had long been missing. The place was no longer haunted by absence. It was being reborn. Amara, in her simple jeans and a paint-streaked shirt, tied her braids into a bun and picked up a brush, transforming the faded porch rails with strokes of color and care, while Logan hauled out weathered tools, rediscovering pieces of himself in every cracked board he fixed. The house had once witnessed heartbreak, but now it began to breathe again, through laughter, through hammers and paint, through forgiveness whispered in glances and passed between fingertips. Amara found the courage to walk through each room, recalling where she once wept, now placing fresh flowers where sorrow had sat. The walls that had been stained with silence now echoed with Noah's questions and Ava's little songs, their voices wrapping around the old beams like ivy, healing wounds no one could see. One afternoon, Logan worked tirelessly to repair the old swing that had always been hers, the one where she used to read, to dream, to wait. As he sanded the wood smooth and secured the ropes, he looked over his shoulder to where Amara stood watching, eyes shining like dawn, and said softly, "I lost you once. I'll never lose you again." She didn't speak, but her hand brushed his shoulder, anchoring him in the moment. Inside, she cleaned the kitchen, removing the cobwebs of time, while Logan lit the fireplace for the first time in years. its glow flickering against the walls like the rekindling of a soul. The children found an old photo album and brought it to Amara, who sat with them on the porch steps, pointing to pictures of their father as a young man, full of dreams, unaware of the storms ahead. Logan watched them from afar, swallowed by emotions he couldn't name, but which now felt like peace. They planted marigolds by the fence, and Amara wrote the kids' names on little stones by the garden, creating a sacred space of new beginnings. That night, as fireflies danced and crickets sang, Logan sat with Amara under the oak tree, the same one that once sheltered their teenage hearts, and listened as she talked about the life she'd built alone, the strength it took, and the pieces she held onto, even when it broke her. He responded not with words, but by taking her hand, weathered like his, strong like his, and full of warmth he thought he'd never feel again. The farm was no longer a place of ghosts. It was alive. It was home. And for the first time in 9 long years, the Logan whispered into the wind, "Thank you for bringing her back." The afternoon sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the farmhouse as Logan gently pushed Amara on the newly fixed swing, her laughter mixing with the children's shrieks of joy echoing from the barn. For a fleeting moment, peace felt real, until the distant sound of tires crunching on gravel pierced the calm, and Logan froze mid-push, recognizing the rhythm of the engine like a ghost from the past. Amara's expression sobered as she turned her head, and the twins ran to her instinctively, sensing a shift in the air. The car came to a halt, and out stepped Evelyn, her pearl earrings glinting coldly in the light, her carefully combed hair as rigid as her spine, unaware of the storm she was about to walk into. Her heels clicked harshly against the porch wood as she took in the sight before her, pausing mid-step when she saw Amara. But it was the two identical faces peeking from behind their mother's dress that truly brought colorless terror to her features, draining her face to the shade of paper. Amara instinctively placed her hands protectively on the children's shoulders, her voice calm but sharp as broken glass as she said, "They're your grandchildren, but they'll never feel your hate." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came, only a flustered gasp as if she'd swallowed the truth whole and it lodged in her throat. Logan stepped forward slowly, each step weighed down by years of aching silence, betrayal, and the gaping wound she'd left in him, until he stood between his mother and his family, not just physically, but emotionally, finally choosing the side he should have long ago. Evelyn tried to recover, her mouth twitching into the familiar performative smile as she stammered, "Logan, I didn't know. I thought she left you." But Logan's eyes, now older, raw, and lined with grief, flashed not with anger but with exhausted clarity as he whispered, "You burned the one thing I needed most, her words, the letter. You knew she reached out." Evelyn's lips trembled as she looked to Amara, then back to Lowe's. "Gan," panic creeping into her voice now, "I was trying to protect you, son. She wasn't right for us. She would have ruined your name, your chances, everything your father built." But Logan cut her off, his voice steady like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. "No. You ruined everything. You tore away the only light I had. You chose your pride over my heart. And now you'll live with that." Evelyn's knees wobbled slightly, reaching for the porch rail like a woman suddenly aged by the truth, as Logan turned to the children and knelt, touching their cheeks gently. "These two are everything you tried to erase, and yet here they are, full of love and wonder, despite you." Amara remained quiet, letting Logan take the lead, her strength pouring into his resolve like sunlight through glass. Evelyn looked at them, this picture of love, healing, resilience, and something bitter twisted her face, but even she knew there was no space left for her in this frame. "Logan, I'm your mother," she said softly, desperately. But Logan shook his head slowly, his jaw clenched, not in anger but finality. "Not anymore. A real mother doesn't bury her son's happiness under silence. You're a stranger who shares my blood. That's all." Evelyn staggered back, as if slapped by the coldest wind, and without another word, turned, walking stiffly down the porch steps as the gravel crunched louder than before. Amara exhaled slowly, the children burying their faces into her legs. unsure but comforted by her calm, and Logan walked over, wrapping his arms around all three of them, burying his face in Amara's shoulder as the sound of the car starting broke the silence one last time. "You did it," Amara whispered gently, her lips near his ear. "You chose your truth." Logan didn't reply, but the tears that fell onto her neck said everything. Tears of a man who finally severed the chain that had bound his heart too. Oh, the past. That night, no words were needed between them as they sat by the fireplace, the children asleep upstairs, the farm quieter than ever, not from absence, but from peace. Amara rested her head on his chest, and for the first time in 9 years, Logan's heartbeat wasn't heavy. It was steady, warm, and free. The fire crackled gently in the hearth as the night deepened around the farmhouse, but outside, in the heart of the barn, a warm glow began to rise, soft lanterns flickering like fireflies, their light brushing against the aged wooden beams now dressed with white linen and wildflowers. Amara stepped outside, following the gentle trail of petals lit by mason jars, glowing with candles, curiosity flickering in her chest with every careful step. When she reached the barn doors, they creaked open as Logan appeared, dressed neatly in a button-down shirt she hadn't seen in years, the faintest cologne in the air reminding her of the days when they first fell in love. Her lips parted in surprise as she stepped inside and saw the transformation. Bales of hay turned into cozy seats draped in cloth, a table set for two near the center, soft instrumental music humming in the background, and overhead, strings of twinkling lights danced between the beams like stars brought down just for them. Amara turned to him, stunned, her eyes glassy with emotion, but Logan only smiled with the quiet nervousness of a man who was trying to heal something sacred. "I wanted tonight to be about us," he said softly, offering his hand. "Not the pain, not the years we lost, just us." Her fingers slid into his, and something unspoken passed between them, a warmth, a forgiveness, a rebirth. He led her to the table and pulled out her chair like it was their first date again, his touch gentle but full of reverence. Over dinner, they shared memories between soft laughter and long looks. Amara told him how she used to sit by the window and pretend he could hear her thoughts, while Logan admitted he used to fix broken fence posts just to keep busy so he wouldn't collapse from missing her. The twin peeked once from the house window and giggled, but then disappeared, knowing instinctively this night was just for Mama and Daddy. After the last bite of dessert, a warm peach pie she'd always loved, Logan stood and extended his hand again, this time with a twinkle in his eye. "Dance with me," he whispered. Amara hesitated only a second before rising, her heart fluttering as he wrapped one arm around her waist and gently took her other hand, swaying slowly with her to a melody that felt like home. There was no rush, no urgency, just two souls moving gently through the quiet of the night, surrounded by memories that no longer hurt, only healed. The barn became a sacred chapel, the creak of the wood beneath their feet, the only witness to the vows being written in silence. As the music faded, Logan looked down at her, eyes damp, voice trembling as he said, "I want to marry you again. Not because of guilt, but because I never stopped loving you." Amara's breath caught, tears escaping despite her smile. "You mean that?" she asked, and Logan nodded slowly, the way only a man who's walked through fire for love can. He didn't get on one knee. There was no need. His heart was already laid bare, and hers answered before the words could leave her lips. She kissed him then, slowly, fully, like time had bowed to their love, and finally surrendered. Beneath the open barn doors, under a sky spilling with stars, they walked hand in hand to the field, collapsing gently onto a quilt he'd laid out earlier, and curled into each other like puzzle pieces finally aligned. They spoke of dreams they still held, the home they'd rebuild, the twins' futures, and the strength it took for both of them to survive the storm. No clothes came off that night, yet it was the most intimate moment they had ever shared. His fingers brushed her cheek, her hand rested over his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had only ever been hers. The silence between them was sacred, deepened by the warmth of breath shared and the way their bodies fit with years of memory stitched between them. They didn't need more. The closeness, the honesty, the soft laughter, and the way their legs tangled beneath the stars was enough to remind them that love, when real, doesn't need grand gestures. It just needs truth. As they drifted into sleep beneath the moonlight, wrapped in each other's arms, Logan whispered one last time, "You are, and have always been, the home I lost and found again." Amara smiled against his neck, eyes closed, heart full, knowing this night would forever be theirs, not as an escape, but as the beginning of forever. As dawn painted the sky in tender shades of gold and lavender, the scent of fresh hay and the sound of birds waking filled the quiet air around the barn. Amara stood beside Logan, holding the deed to the farm in her trembling hands, heart pounding with bittersweet resolve. She had poured her savings, her strength and her soul into reclaiming the land that once broke her, and now she was ready to let it go, not in surrender, but in peace. With quiet finality, she extended the folder toward him, eyes searching his for understanding. "It's yours," she whispered. "I brought it back for you. For the children. For whatever this is becoming." But Logan didn't take the folder. Instead, his fingers tore through the paper, shredding it without a flinch, his blue eyes burning not with anger, but with a fierce kind of love that silenced the earth around them. "No," he said, voice steady but soaked in emotion. "We rebuild this together. No secrets, no running, no more pain in silence." Amara's breath caught as the pieces of the deed floated to the floor like fragile memories, and she saw in him the man she once believed in, the man who had lost his way, but never stopped searching for home. The children came running then, barefoot on dew-kissed grass, their laughter echoing like a hymn through the morning fields. Logan scooped them up, one on each hip, as Amara followed behind, barefoot, hair loose in the wind, the past no longer a chain, but a bridge. They reached the porch, and for a moment everything stilled, just the four of them, hands intertwined, eyes toward the sunrise, hearts wide open. Logan pulled Amara closer, forehead resting on hers, and the children wrapped their arms around their parents' legs, their giggles softening into sleepy yawns. Tears welled in Amara's eyes, not from sadness, but from release, the kind that comes when a chapter ends not in tragedy, but in quiet triumph. Logan turned to her, brushing a curl from her face, voice low and reverent. "I want to build a future here, with you. Not out of guilt, not out of fear, but because when I imagine peace, you're in every corner of it." Amara pressed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his chest, and nodded. "Then let's plant love where pain once grew," she whispered. Together they watched the sun rise higher, bathing the old farmhouse in golden light as the wind whispered through the fields, carrying away the ghosts of yesterday. No grand announcements, no witnesses but the sky, just a family, rising from ruin, daring to believe in new beginnings. The children danced around the swing Logan rebuilt, their laughter lifting like music, while Logan and Amara walked the edge of the field hand in hand, the dirt beneath them rich with memory and hope. He stopped to kiss her forehead, and she leaned into it, both of them understanding that some things, like love, are reborn, not replaced. The scars remained, but they were no longer wounds, they were roots, and in those roots they found strength. As they made their way back to the farmhouse, Logan paused, turned to Amara, and said with quiet certainty, "Home isn't walls or land. It's us. It always was." And she smiled. Not the guarded smile of a woman who'd been hurt, but the full, bright smile of someone who'd survived, healed, and dared to love again. And beneath that rising sun, they stood, broken once, but now whole, forever bound by love that refused to die. Sometimes life pulls us apart to teach us the value of what we lost, but when love returns, stronger, wiser, it can heal even the deepest wounds.